We have finished with the epidermis. Let's start talking about the dermis, remember, which is underneath the epidermis. The dermis is the main part of your skin. It's connective tissue composed of collagen and elastic fibers, fibroblasts, macrophages, and fat cells. A lot of those words should ring familiar from Bio 156. Collagen, remember, a protein. Elastic fibers, you know what they do. We'll talk about those. Contains hair follicles, glands, nerves, and blood vessels. So lots of stuff in the dermis. Remember, the epidermis is relatively simple. The dermis itself has a lot more kinds of stuff in it. There are two major regions. We had 5 layers of the epidermis. There are 2 major regions of the dermis. The top layer is called the papillary region. And once again, papilla in Latin means nipple. So that's because the papillary region is full of these nipple-like structures. And we'll see those coming up. There's a better picture in a slide upcoming. You can kind of see them on the far left. Then the reticular region is the bottom region. And so papillary makes up like 20% of the dermis. Reticular is 80%. That's where most of the stuff is, all right? Tattooing, by the way, is the permanent coloration of the skin by injecting foreign pigments into the dermis. There's the technical definition of a tattoo. Try that the next time you go out to get ink. Walk into the tattoo parlor and say, I would like to have my skin permanently colored by the injection of foreign pigments into my dermis. They'll probably throw you out, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. And there you see up on the top the little tattoo machine. What it does is the needle is going brrrr. That's, many times per second. It's piercing your epidermis, going down into your dermis and leaving a little blob of ink behind. Then it comes all the way back out. Then it goes down in, leaves another blob of ink. So you can see there it's left behind 2 blobs of ink. You may think of the tattoo artist as making a line, but it's really just a bunch of individual blobs of ink. That's why, sometimes you see a tattoo on a person, the person's like 70 years old, and they got a tattoo of something when they were like 17 years old, and you look at the tattoo and you go, oh my God, what is that? And they say, well, yeah, I got a picture of my girlfriend tattooed when I was 17, and now it looks like some kind of hideous monster thing. So keep in mind, as the dermis gets old, it gets saggy and wrinkly, and tattoos may not look the same in the future. Keep that in mind, all right? And, why wouldn't you, why couldn't you just get a tattoo into the dermis? I love to ask this question in class, and people start waving their hands because they're so excited to get called on. And I say, yes. What is it? And they go, well, because if you tattooed just into the epidermis, it would wear off. And I go, no, that's not why. And they look shocked. And then I say, no, it's okay. That's exactly right. Those henna tattoos, the temporary tattoos, how do you suppose those work? Yeah, those just go into the epidermis. And so remember, you shed your entire dermis within 6 weeks, and you shed the stratum corneum within just a week or 2. So those henna tattoos will come off very quickly as you shed your epidermis. And there you go, a very sad story. The young woman in the upper left. There's an online casino called goldenpalace.com. And this is, over 10 years ago, I think. But they offered $5,000 to anyone who would get goldenpalace.com tattooed on their forehead. And so she did it. And they asked her why, and she said that she's a single mom. She said it's for her child's college education. I'm thinking $5,000, I don't know. You could become a stripper and make a lot more money than that in a shorter period of time, I think. Although, I've had a lot of former strippers in my class, and they say that stripping used to make good money, but now, apparently with all the online porn, it's getting harder and harder to make a good living as a stripper. And by the way, when she got the tattoo, she had to sign a paper saying if she ever got it removed, she would have to pay back the $5,000. I don't know, it's a sad story, I think. Let's take a look at the top region of the dermis, the papillary region. It's the upper 20%. Papilla in Latin means nipple, so now you can really see. You can see in the left there, I've got that red arrow pointing at it. Actually sort of a cinnamon, I don't know. I'm still working on my project Runway Colors. But you can see the dermal papillae. You can also see there also the epidermal ridges, all right? That's where the stratum basale is conforming to the dermal papillae. That's what causes the fingerprints, remember? So papillary region is a lot of areolar connective tissue. a lot of corpuscles of touch, Meissner's corpuscles. So this is yet another tactile receptor. It's also for light touch. And when we get to the sensory systems at the end of the semester, we'll look in more detail at these. But for right now, this is just another detector, a receptor for light touch. There are also adipose cells in here, hair follicles, sebaceous glands, which is the technical name for an oil gland, and yes, you now have to know that. We're taking an anatomy and physiology class. You can call them oil glands when you're with your, all your friends out there, having a Michelob or whatever at your favorite sports bar. But in this class, we're going to call them sebaceous glands, okay? And there are also sudoriferous glands, informally known as sweat glands. You can call them that when you're with your friends at the gym, as soon as the gym's open, which I guess they are opening again now. But we're going to call them sudoriferous glands. There are lots of collagen and elastic fibers. They provide strength, and they provide the ability to stretch, which is called extensibility, and they provide the ability to snap back, which is elasticity. Don't mix these up. I usually ask about these on a quiz or an exam, and people get them all mixed up. Don't do this. A lot of people think elasticity means the ability to stretch. No, it actually doesn't. Extensibility is the ability to stretch. Elasticity means it snaps back. Okay, think of an elastic fiber snapping back. Rubber bands, that's elasticity. They snap back. Stretching is extensibility. And again, you can see in the lower right there, you can see the dermal papillae and the epidermal ridges, and they fit together, kind of like in carpentry, a dovetail joint or mortise and tenon joints or whatever. And I'm not a carpenter, but I've worked with wood before. But yeah, so there you see, that's what forms the fingerprints. It's the epidermis conforming to the dermal papillae. And why do you do that? Because finger joints, another type of joint, are very strong in carpentry. They hold things together very well. Finger joints provide very, very solid connections. Continuing with the papillary region, the finger-like projections called the dermal papillae. They anchor the epidermis to the dermis. Again, a very strong connection. They contain capillary loops that feed the epidermis. So remember, are there any blood vessels in the epidermis? The answer is no. What was the word? Avascular. But remember, there are living cells in that stratum basale. The stem cells are alive. The melanocytes are alive. The keratinocytes are alive. Remember, what does every living cell need in order to stay alive? It needs oxygen and glucose to make ATP. So if there are no blood vessels in the epidermis, then how can those cells down in the stratum basale stay alive? Well, there are little capillary loops, which is what I have another red arrow pointing to there. There are little capillary loops that come up into the dermal papillae, and oxygen and glucose can diffuse out of the capillaries and upwards into the epidermis. And that's how the stem cells and the keratinocytes and the melanocytes stay alive. They get their glucose and oxygen from the capillary loops in the papillary region of the dermis. There are also these corpuscles of touch, used to be called Meissner's. That name has officially gone away. That was the eponym. We now call them corpuscles of touch. And free nerve endings. So this is, I think we'll see a better picture coming up. But there are nerves that basically just dead end in the dermis. They don't have any special ending, no special structure on them. They just come to a dead end. And free nerve endings are important for a lot of senses. So heat, cold, pain, tickle, itch, those are all just free nerve endings that dead end in the dermis. When we look at the senses at the end of the class, we'll see exactly how that works, okay? But for now, just remember there are tons of what are called free nerve endings that carry a lot of sensory information back to the brain from your skin. That was the papillary region. Now moving down into the reticular region. That's the deep 80% of the dermis. This is dense, irregular connective tissue. So it's kind of, a haphazard framework, and that's actually good. Makes it tough, durable. Packed with oil glands, sweat gland ducts, adipose cells, hair follicles. Collagen fibers, again, provide flexibility. Collagen, important in connective tissue. It's a protein. It's very strong. Resists stretching, but bends easily. So in other words, you don't want your skin to be completely floppy. You want to have it to have some form to it. So the collagen gives it form, but nonetheless it will bend when it has to. All right, so very convenient properties. And once again, there are elastic fibers that snap back. So when something causes your skin to stretch or bend, the elastic fibers will cause it to snap back. Once again, remember extensibility versus elasticity. Extensibility means your skin can stretch. Elasticity means it can snap back. So again, you're limiting the flexibility. You want some flexibility, not too much. The collagen and the elastic fibers working together provide just exactly the right mix. So continuing with the reticular region, wrinkles and sagging, what's going on there? Well, that's just reduced elasticity. As you get old, the elastic fibers just don't work as well anymore. You don't have as many, and the skin starts to just wrinkle and sag. You can't help it. Just what happens. I'll give you general principles here. As you get older, things that are supposed to be stiff get floppy, and things that are supposed to be floppy get stiff. So here, this is stiff getting floppy, skin gets floppy. Floppy getting stiff is like in your arteries. You want your arteries to be nice and floppy. As you get older, they get stiff. You get arteriosclerosis. We'll talk about that a lot in Bio 202 when we do the cardiovascular system. Caused by age, dehydration, UV light. The more time you spend in the sun, the wrinkly your skin gets. You've seen those people that spend most of their lives outside, workers who work outside. Man, when they get into their 60s and 70s, they just got wrinkles everywhere. That's just the way it works. Hormonal changes do it as well. Stretch marks, what's going on with that? Well, those are dermal tears from extreme stretching. So if you overstretch the ability of your skin, then you actually make a tear in the dermis. And those will heal up, but they provide essentially a scar, and that's what a stretch mark is. You're just seeing a scar, essentially, from where the dermis tore. Typical causes, pregnancy. That little parasite causes your whole belly to stretch out. Some people who do weight loss, if you do it very rapidly, sometimes you can get that to happen. And breast augmentation surgery. That's often a good way to spot the fake boobs. They've got little stretch marks on them from where the dermis had to overstretch in order to accommodate that big saline or silicone implant. Epidermal ridges again form in the fetus as the epidermis conforms to the dermal papillae, and fingerprints result from sweat glands open on the ridges. So remember, we saw the epidermal ridges below, and you can see them in the lower right there, the fingerprints. So what happens is, we saw a few slides ago, there was a zoomed in picture where you could see the actual sweat pores on the epidermal ridges. You're always producing little bits of sweat, whether you realize it or not. We call it insensible perspiration. So even when you don't see bubbles of sweat, you're always leaving little bits of sweat behind. And so that's what happens. When you touch something, you leave tiny bits of sweat behind, and that leaves a little mark. And then that's why the police can come in, and they can put down that dust, and then they can see your fingerprints. So don't try it. You're going to get caught. They're going to catch you. You think you can get away with it? No. They'll catch you. Fingerprints. They also increase the grip of your hand. Maybe not much, but a little bit. Just all those little ridges give that extra little bit. I was back in 2008, I got stranded at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I spent 2 days trying to climb out. And at one point, I got to a place where I was going up the wrong way, and I was thinking, gosh, this doesn't look right. I don't remember this. But I got to a point where I actually had to jump across kind of a big drop of maybe like a couple 100 feet. And I had to grab a couple of rocks. So I planned it out very carefully, and I thought through my head of exactly which rocks I was going to grab. So I jumped and I grabbed those rocks, and one of them was loose, and it came right out of the wall of the canyon. So I was literally hanging there by one hand, a couple 100 feet from the bottom. And I did a one-handed pull-up that day. I'm pretty sure I couldn't do a one-handed pull-up now, but I did one that day. But it's funny the things that go through your head. As I was hanging, dangling above the Grand Canyon, I was thinking, thank goodness for my epidermal ridges. They're keeping me alive. John Dillinger, by the way, do you know about John Dillinger in Tucson? Yes, they caught him right here in Tucson, down by Hotel Congress. The Lady in Red, I think. There's a great story. Google it, read it. I've read it before. I've forgotten most of it. But John Dillinger, a famous bank robber, crook, You see this all the time in gangster movies too. They try to burn their fingerprints off with acid. He tried that. He tried to take acid and burn his fingerprints off so they couldn't catch him using fingerprints. But after he was dead, they fingerprinted him and it was still recognizable. So see, crime doesn't pay. Keep that in mind, kids. Crime doesn't pay. All right, have you been paying attention? Which of these is not found in the epidermis? Would that be melanocytes, blood vessels, stem cells, lipids, or keratinocytes? Da, 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 da. Pause the video, come back when you're ready. Right, remember the epidermis is avascular. There are no blood vessels. An interesting thing with the dermis are what are called cleavage lines. So the collagen and elastic fibers are not arranged in random. They're in parallel bundles forming what are called cleavage lines, and you can see those diagrams on the right. Those are the cleavage lines. Every surgeon knows these by heart, because here's the deal. They're externally invisible, but they resist forces in specific directions. So surgeons have to know these, because if you make an incision perpendicular to the cleavage line, you're going to make a big scar. Whereas if you go parallel, you'll make a much smaller scar. So look on the right there, you can see on the top there's an incision perpendicular. That's going to leave a bigger scar than the incision that's parallel. So again, depending on where you're going to cut on the body, that's the way you do it. As you may know, women who've had what do they call it when they have to cut you open to get the baby out? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So notice how the cleavage lines are going relatively horizontal or oblique. Yeah, hysterectomy. I was just testing to see if you knew. No, that hysterectomy is when you get your uterus cut out. So think it over. I know you know it. But you can see how they don't make a vertical incision for most of those. They make relatively horizontal or oblique incisions, and that keeps big scar lines from forming. And particularly bad kind of scar you see in the lower left-hand corner called a keloid scar. This is an abnormal scar formation. They happen from time to time. You can often get them removed. They use some kind of abrasion or something. I don't remember exactly how they do it. So, and of course, I'm hoping you all thought of it. It's a C-section. All right, that's when you can't deliver vaginally and they have to go in and cut. But notice they cut along the cleavage lines. Okay. So the hypodermis, we're now under the skin. Hypodermis, below the skin, also known as the subcutaneous layer, the sub-Q. Not technically part of the skin. Remember, I emphasized that before. Part of the muscular tissue, part of what we call the superficial fascia. Composed of elastic, areolar, and adipose tissue, stabilizes the skin, allows movement of skin independent of muscle. So like if you make a fist, and if you can see any little muscles in your arm, grab your skin and move the skin. And notice the muscles stay in place, but the skin moves. Yeah, that prevents you from tearing your skin all the time. The hypodermis provides an independent boundary in between the underlying muscle and the more superficial dermis, and it allows the dermis to move relatively independently of the muscle underneath. That prevents you from tearing your skin all the time and also from tearing your muscles. Adipose can be removed by liposuction. You can see there on the right-hand side, you can see this is someone who's going in for a liposuction, and you can see the X's. That's probably where they're going to stick the tip of that liposuction needle. It's basically like a vacuum cleaner. They suck the adipose out. You can see it coming through. They have little clear tubes. You can see the big chunks of adipose getting sucked out. Those work pretty well as long as you follow up with a change in the lifestyle habits that cause those lumps of adipose to form in the first place. And hypodermis is also where you have the site of the subcutaneous injections, the sub-Q injections. And what do they use to do that? They use a hypodermic needle. Why is it called a hypodermic needle? Because it goes hypo the dermis. And you can see there in the lower left what my former students look like who are now nurses. And they're going, "Are you ready for your injection, bitch?" Doesn't she look like she has great attitude? Yeah, I love to get injections from people with attitudes. Now, dermal modification, not a huge topic, but a very common thing these days, so worth just taking a couple minutes on. So body piercing involves puncturing the dermis so that jewelry can be worn. That's what body piercings are. I know you already knew that, but let's just try to classify here. With body piercing, you make two holes so that each piece is external to the dermis. So like in the earlobe, that's a body piercing. There's a hole on one side and a hole on the other, so it goes all the way through from one side to the other. Common areas include ears, nose, genitals, lips, tongue, nipples, and the umbilicus. All right. I'm sure you've seen people with all of those different kinds of piercings. Then there are microdermal implants, in which what's happening is an anchor is placed in the hypodermis, underneath the dermis, and then there's a removable piece of jewelry that can be taken on or off. So now it doesn't go all the way through, it doesn't come out on the other side. You anchor a piece in the hypodermis. That's a microdermal. And then subdermals are where they implant things underneath the dermis so the skin heals over it. You've seen people that have the lumps on their head and stuff like that, the subdermals. They look pretty cool, I think. These, as well as other forms of decorative body modification, such as filing of teeth, stretching of the skin, intentional scarring, and shaping of cranial bones, have been practiced by cultures for thousands of years. Sometimes you hear people go, "Oh gosh, those people getting all those piercings and tattoos." Oh, come on, just get over it. People have been doing it for thousands of years. It's a human tradition. It's very natural. It happens in lots and lots of different societies. Here you see a person with intentional keloid scars. And doesn't that look awesome? I just think that looks fabulous. I'd actually love to run my hand over that. I think it would feel really cool to feel those scars. See people from cultures all over the world, Maori and Inuits, and people from Africa, the ancient Maya. There in the bottom right, they intentionally put pieces of wood, like flat pieces of wood, on a baby's head to deform the skull. Didn't cause any problems. The brain just grows into the new space. People deform the lips. Aborigines, you got the thing in the nose. I think it's awesome. Body modifications, tattoos, cool stuff. Just stay in your own lane, okay? Let other people do what they want. Doesn't hurt you. Let them go.